Well, welcome to Celebrating Astrology with this very special edition with somebody that you recognize, Steve Judd. Steve, as most of you will know, is making this amazing film on the history of astrology. And I thought it would be a brilliant idea to interview him about the history and what he's discovered while he's making this film. So, Steve, over to you. Just explain to us what you've discovered through your experience of going all over the place, so many countries, to explore the origins of astrology.
That would take too long. We haven't got 9 hours. But what I'd like to do is take you on a sort of a bullet point with some of the stories, because some of the things I found out are truly exceptional. Astrology, let me just turn my phone off. Sorted. I love throwing phones. When I set out to do a docuseries on the history of Western astrology, I thought to myself, I've got some serious research. Now, because of my MA background in cultural astronomy and astrology, I'm able to, I've got the resource materials and I know the people to talk to. I know where to find the information I need. So I've done a lot of research in advance. And I have to ask myself, where did astrology first start? And it started when humanity got off its knuckles and started looking at the night sky. And then it started when people started living in groups and communities. And first of all, those of them by the shore would have noticed the correlation between the tides and the phases of the moon. And also women would have noticed how their cycles would have worked with the phases of the moon. So this is the original beginning of how the planetary movements affected humanity. How we derive meaning from the movement of the planets and the stars in the heavens is a long subject, but it's factual that calendars were starting to be carved on rocks and stones and bones as early as 75,000 BC. But we know for certain that early humanity was aware of the solstices and the equinoxes, and from this came calendars, because we have a number of artifacts, caves, monuments where they're all lit up by the sun on the solstice or on the equinox. And this is a tradition that's lasted to this day, with churches and cathedrals being set out to specific sunrise days. We know that the earliest cities, according to contemporary history at least, for example, Jericho, the towers of Jericho were used as observatories.
Oh, right.
We know that the Sumerians, which are the earliest civilization that history accepts as from Mesopotamia, from about 4,000 BCE, were using the positions of the planets and the stars in the sky to choose the time to crown the king, because the copper scrolls in the Berlin Rijksmuseum and in the British Museum show this. But this is all proto-astrology. It's not until the end of the Sumerian Empire, through the Chaldean into the Babylonian Empire, because the Babylonian Empire lasted well over 1,000 years. Yes, and that gave their priests 1,000 years of observation. And from the Babylonians, we start seeing the first constellations. The Babylonians definitely knew about Gemini, Leo, and Sagittarius. They also worked out that the evening star and the morning star were the same planet, Venus. They also worked out the orbital position, the orbital rotational periods of Jupiter. When the Babylonian Empire fell to the Persians, The Assyrians and the Persians weren't into astrology so much, but astrology lasted through to the Egyptians. But really, Western astrology begins with the seafaring people of the Aegean when they landed on the mainland of Greece, formed into different collective tribes, and slowly an emerging mythology that united them all came about from the mountains around Thessaloniki in North Greek Macedonia, on the border with what is now southern Macedonia, because that's where you've got the huge Olympian mountains. Now, I spoke with...
That's Steve, that's the place of the gods.
Well, I spoke with a couple when we were in Greece. I went to Mount Olympus and I saw the fire of the gods. I saw the cave of Chiron. I saw where Orpheus went into the underworld. I saw where Prometheus was chained to the cliff. I also spoke with Greek astrologer
Alecho?
Oh, no, not just Alejo, but Kostas Levikas, a Greek astrologer of 50, 60 years experience, who speaks 5 different Greek languages. And we did that in the shadow of the Parthenon, the temple of Pallas Athena. And he suggested to me that probably it was just something like 2 or 3 different villages fighting over land or women or something like that. But the legend of the fight became the myth, and it became the story of the gods and of the Titans versus the Olympians, the fall into Tartarus. And he said, and this is a myth that is spread worldwide, but it's just that the Greek version endured. And somewhere along the line, the linkage between the gods and the planets became factual. Whilst in Greece, I did speak to Alejo also. Alejo, what's his name? It's on the tip of my tongue. A lovely young Argentinian guy who lives in Greece, as an astrologer, and he got the highest marks on the MA.
Oh,
Lopez. Yeah, his ideas on the recharacterization of gender in the planets are amazing. It really challenged the way I was thinking. But to go back to...
Can I just say something here? If you want to hear him speak, I'll put a link to the interview I did with him at the end of this video.
Excellent. Yes, because he's on the cutting edge of the young groups of astrologers coming through. He's a brilliant guy. What I really learned in our journeys in Greece and then Rome, we went on to it. After Rome, we went further on into Italy, but that deals with Renaissance astrology, and that's further on down the line. Roman astrology, the transition of astrology from Greece to Rome only took 150 years, which is a dot in the ocean. But there's such a fundamental difference. In Greece, you've got people like Pythagoras, and then a few hundred years later, Socrates, who taught Plato, who taught Aristotle. Mm-hmm. And when I was at the Oracle of Delphi, I was walking in the footsteps of giants. I was walking in their footsteps. It was amazing. But their ideas were on the cosmos. They were looking at the orbital rotation of the planets and the sun and the moon and the earth. And they were dealing with the cosmology of astrology, the philosophy of astrology. They weren't looking at individual horoscopes. There is no record, to my knowledge, of individual horoscopes apart from 1 or 2 Greek kings, emperors, Cyrus the Great, maybe. But that's all. Whereas once you get to Rome, it's an immediate transition to, oh, can you do my horoscope? When can I be emperor? When can I make some money? When can I go into business?
Why do you think
and that happened?
Why do you think that suddenly happened?
I think it's a cultural thing.
Mm.
Bearing in mind the Greeks were the progenitors of democracy.
Mm.
They fought to get their warring groups together and formed a united kingdom of democratic people where everyone had a say, at least on the surface. Whereas Rome was much more warlike.
Mm.
It was born from war, and it was all about conquering territory. The Greeks weren't interested in that.
Mm.
And so I think that's why the idea of astrology being used for personal gain took off. So from the temples of Pallas Athena and Apollo, the oracle at Delphi, Mount Olympus, where I genuinely did see the fire of the gods.
How did you see it?
I was 2/3 of the way up Mount Olympus, where the road ends.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to climb, and I'm too old for that. You need ropes and pitons and things like that. And it was about 4 p.m. It was sunset in an hour. And as the day drew to an end, so the white clouds formed over the mountains, and then the sun set behind them. And then the clouds turned yellow, and then they turned orange, and then they turned red. And you saw these red dancing clouds over Mount Olympus and the mountains around it. Really was the fire of the gods.
Wow. Okay.
It was amazing. And apparently it only happens like that about 5 or 6 times a year. So they put on a performance for me. I was well pleased, well flattered.
Yeah.
And we got it on film. When we went to Rome to follow the transition of astrology into the period from, say, 200 BCE through to 400 CE, then we're dealing with a much more structured way of managing astrology, and nowhere is that more evident than in their buildings. The Colosseum was awful, dripping in blood. When we realised after the arguments we had there amongst the crew, which was the only arguments we had on the entire journey, but we were in a building where for 3-4 centuries, thousands of people have been in there every week baying for blood at the slaughter of the gladiators and the slaves with the lions. And it's like, and to see couples getting married there was just a bit weird. But
really felt that dark.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas the Pantheon, which was built about 100 BCE, is still existent in the center of Rome. Its height is exactly the same as its diameter, and its ceiling is set into 4s, 7s, and 28s. So it's just a true temple to the heavens.
Oh my gosh.
We went to various different temples of Saturn and Hestia and Vesta. But then after that, we just thought, okay, this is a bit... What we did do, we jumping ahead into the Renaissance in Rome, it's an amazing basilica where they've carved a little hole in the ceiling, and the sunlight comes in and illuminates a line that they've put in the floor with all the zodiac symbols each side of it, which is the meridian line. And it was to make sure that the Earth was in a stable orbit, and that line was always lit up by the sun at midday. Different levels as the sun went up and down, but it was to check that it was to do a precession and the Earth's wobble.
How did they work all of that out, though?
Well, this was around because it was in that same basilica. I was in there with all these amazing floors, carvings, walls. And then my crew said to me, come with us. We've got something to show you. We're not going to tell you what it is. We want to see your reaction. And we walked around the back, and in a back courtyard, unnoticed, unsignposted, was a 20-foot high metal statue of Galileo. At which point I just broke.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it's one of only 2 times I cried. I got down on my knees in front of it and said, thank you. So, yeah. There were a lot, the Vatican astrologers of the 15 and 1600s were working a lot with stuff around the meridian and the zodiac cycles at that time. And they put it into their architecture. From here, we came back to, did we do this before Rome and Greece? No, before Rome and Greece, but with episode 4, because episode 1 is prehistory, 2 is Greece, 3 is Rome. 4, we traced astrology from the fall of Rome in 465 AD to Constantinople with the Eastern Roman Empire. And then all the way around the Levant, along the North African coast, seeing how the Arab population at that time, this is pre-Islamic,
yes,
the Arab population at that time were working out different constellations and their meaning, as well as the Arabic parts. And by the time they got to Morocco, around 700 AD, 700 BC, Common Era, CE, they merged with the Berber people, and then they jumped to Spain around about 720 CE, and there you get the Golden Islamic Age. And that's where we spent almost a week there, because places like the Alhambra in Granada, the Grand Mosque in Cordoba, the biggest mosque in the world outside of Saudi, all set out with perfect architecture built to the rhythm and movements of the planets in the sky. It's a place of joy, of harmony, of architectural beauty.
And it's got the pillars everywhere, Steve, haven't that? I remember, is it 12 pillars, which is the sign of creation? I don't know, but I think...
Yes, but do you also get the 12 pillars in the temples of Mithras?
Yes.
Which we saw in Rome and which are in London underneath the Bloomberg building, you know, the old Tolos, the 12 pillars. And something that goes back, every religion's adapted it to their usage, but it's something that goes back pre-religion. 12 disciples, 12 signs.
Well, absolutely.
When the Spanish kings and queens retook Andalusia, the vastness of the Islamic structures at the Alhambra and Cordoba was so big they couldn't do anything about it. So they just put on a Catholic veneer around the inside. For example, when you go in the Grand Mosque in Cordoba, it's so massive you couldn't knock all the arches down. So they just put a lot of Catholic imagery in all around the walls on the inside and locked them away in cages. Whereas the geometry of the arches,
beautiful,
sublime, absolutely delightful. After this, what you get then is a lot of people like Roger Bacon, for example, traveling to Spain in the 1100s and translating the works of Plato and Aristotle from the Arabic into Latin, because the Arabics translated it from the Greek into Arabic 500, 600 years before. And up until that time.
What I heard was when the Moors were basically chucked out of Spain, they left behind these vast libraries of cosmology.
They did.
And that's what changed. Is this right? That's what it educates the Western understanding of what astronomy was and astrology was about?
Yes. For example, in the Alcazar Gardens in Cordoba, it's a large castle which was originally built pre-Roman, and then the Romans took it over, and then the Visigoths took it over, then the Islamics took it over, then the Christians took it over, you know. 4 towers, one of which is demolished. One which was very high and quite precarious, and went up to the top, and that was a bit, don't do heights. That was for observation. The Northeast Tower was a tower of light and harmony and time, and it had big windows on the outside that narrowed to fine points by the time they got to the inside. And then on the inside, there's also windows at the base of this tower where the small windows open up into big windows as it goes down into the ground. So it's a channel for the alchemical mixture of light and planetary symbol and energy into this crucible, where it then pervades down into the people waiting at the base of the tower. And that was a tower of light. Whereas the opposite tower, the southwest tower, was the headquarters of the Spanish Inquisition for 300 years.
Whoa, really? Oh,
Really, really scary stuff.
did you feel that? Did you, when you went into that tower, did you feel a difference?
I didn't go in there.
You didn't go in there? No.
No. When we were in Cordoba, we saw a ground model of the Jesuit Inquisition of about 100 monks walking, all sort of 8 to 10 inches high in this model, walking along with their crucifixes over their shoulders, all dressed in black robes with black pointed hoods on, little slits for eyes. Very Ku Klux Klan, but black, not white. And it was just...
Did they have that self-flagellation? I can't remember what they call when they do that.
No, that's more of a Roman invention rather than a Spanish one. But it was spooky because it was the Inquisition.
Yeah.
You know, it was so misogynistic and so cruel.
So cruel.
So I wasn't unhappy to leave that type of energy behind. Then by the time you've got to the translation of the Arabic works into Latin, that's the start of the Renaissance. And by the 1250s, you've got a number of families beginning to develop in Italy who are using astrology all the time. And as you get into the 1300s, the Borgias, and then the de Medicis 100 years later, and you've got the golden age of the 1400s, 1400s, 1500s, where particularly the de Medicis in Florence, they would be employing Botticelli, Michelangelo,
and
Da
they
Vinci.
were that symmetry into their paintings, weren't they?
Yes.
And do you think when a kind of code? I mean, you think about, the Last Supper of Leonardo da Vinci. There's a lot of stuff.
Yes, there's a lot of astrological symbolism in these, but I don't buy into the conspiracy stuff of like we're coding something for our descendants in 400 years. They were just weren't able to express their knowledge because of the repression of the church, so they put it into some type of pictorial representation, which could be interpreted a number of different ways, depending on the view of the perceiver. What was lovely was when we went to Bologna, which is a circular city and originally had 12 gates, of which 9 are still standing, 6 in good order, 3 in a state of disrepair, 3 have gone. And they were all the gates of the different signs of the zodiac, the 12 ways into the city. Got some great footage of me at the gate of Pisces and the gate of Scorpio. Bologna is where you've got a lot of people burnt at the stake. I forget his name, not Kadira. The teacher of Copernicus was burnt at the stake in the center of Bologna. In Rome, I stood in the flower market where Gordiano Bruno was burnt at the stake, with his astrology books being used to burn him.
Wow. Gosh. Oh, what a way to go.
And then in Florence, I didn't go in the cathedral because it was just so heavingly full of tourists. But I went to the Basilica, where I stood between 20 yards apart. I stood between the tombs of Galileo and Michelangelo, 2 of the greatest humans who have ever lived. And in front of Galileo, I kind of broke, got down on my knees, just said thank you. Yes. Because without Galileo, where would we be as astrologers?
Yes, he really was. He did break that through, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
So that takes us through the Renaissance. But then there's the next episode, I think it's episode 6, is about the magical England, the time of Henry VIII through to the Civil War, where astrology was in its heyday, the time of Lily and Culpeper at the end around the Civil War, but before that, of time of John Dee and Elizabeth I. So we did a lot of
1500s, 1500s.
Through to the early 1600s.
16.
From about
we'd have had Thomas
from about
Claxon.
late 1400s through to the early 1600s. Yeah.
And then Thomas Claxon was obviously his printing press enabled people there
Yes.
to be able to read
Yes.
their own if they had the money to buy the books. That was a huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did a lot of filming in Mortlake, where Dee, which was Dee's old stomping ground. We filmed at Dee's memorial, because no one knows actually where he's buried, but the stone, the cenotaph of the church where his body is somewhere, we found that. And because John Dee was an amazingly interesting character, and he was Elizabeth's spy master along with Walsingham. And it was like Walsingham did the internal spy stuff, MI5, and Dee did MI6, the externals. And they would communicate, but to avoid them being hacked, they had a code. And Dee used to sign his letters, and initially with two circles with eyes in them, so to say the eyes have it. And then he would put a long line along the top with an angle down, which was like squaring the circle, which is his and Walsingham's suggestion, and that became 007. And Ian Fleming in World War II was reviewing the old documents, and he saw this cipher, and that's where the idea for James Bond came about.
That's how James Bond got his 007. I kind of vaguely knew that, but I didn't know he put the eyes in it. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating finding out all this stuff.
Yeah, I knew about Elizabeth I creating the first spy rings. I knew about that, but I didn't know about that other.
Yes.
And Jack.
And of course, by the time we reach the end of the Civil War, pre-Civil War, 1640. There's 100,000 copies of an astrological almanac being printed in Britain in a population of something like 5 million. 10 years later, post-Civil War, there's 3 astrological almanacs in print. Charles II really just went on all astrologers, apart from one whom broke ranks with the other astrologers and said to the king, I'll be your astrologer, you can get rid of the rest. And that was Charles Moore, the founder of Old Moore's Almanac. And by the time of the late 1600s, we were starting to see periodicals like Tatler and The Observer, things like that were beginning, the proto versions of them were beginning to develop, the first papers, the first weeklies and monthlies. And then you've got people like Jonathan Swift and Daniel Defoe writing in these, going, of course, anybody who believes in astrology must be stupid.
But then we had William Lilly around that time too, didn't we?
Lilly was around that time, yes. He was about 30, 40 years before. He was around the time of Culpeper. Yes. Because without Nicholas Culpeper, again, astrology would not be in the place it is. And I've missed something really important out. About 100 years before that, we went to the tomb in Salzburg of Paracelsus, the first alchemist, who was the first person to start treating a disease or an illness with microscopic amounts of that disease and illness. And yes, the founder of toxicology. Yeah. And he also was very aware of the influence of the planets and the stars. So we have Paracelsus and Culpeper in many ways were similar, because whereas Paracelsus was working with the alchemicals and the actual paraphernalia and chemicals of aiming towards transmutation, Culpeper was working with the herbs and denoting each herb a planetary ruler. When's the best astrological time to grow it, to pick it, to flower it, to plant it, and what it's best used for. And Culpeper's herbal is still on the shelves of so many people. I've got it at home. I've got it here. Yeah.
It was something.
It's fascinating,
wasn't it? It was called something of signatures, that he looked at every leaf and it had a different the shape. he used that. So if it was heart-shaped,
Yeah.
it was heart, or, you know, a calendula was for courage,
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah. And then
If you,
that with a
in the very end of Culpeper's Herbal, on the very last page, he gives the instructions on how to use this book. And it's only about 3 paragraphs long. And he addresses it, first of all, to the profane, and secondly, to those that use astrology. And he said to the profane, don't bother reading this book.
Well, that's
I'm
the name of
praising, obviously.
astrology anyway, isn't it? There's no point talking to people who don't want to hear.
Now, at this time in Europe, you're seeing the development of people post Galileo. You're seeing people like Kepler breaking through, Tycho Brahe, Kepler, and people like this. But there is a kind of breakdown of astrology. Astrology disappears from the streets. It takes off in America, because it's at this time we're seeing the development of the American colonies, and there is a very big interest in astrology at this time. And indeed, Washington and Jefferson were both astrologers, and Washington picked the absolute moment, the minute, to lay the cornerstone of the Capitol building using astrology.
Astrology with them, the settlers, the first settlers.
I prefer to say that astrology jumped the water rather than they took it with them, because astrology always manages to thrive somehow, somewhere. And by the time it came back 100 years later, in Europe, you got Kepler, Brahe, and then Newton in Britain. Now,
the 17th century, wasn't he, Newton?
Yes, 1700s, yeah. Early mid 1700s. And by this time, Newton wasn't an astrologer. And there's a lot of people go, oh, he was into magic, he was into astrology. No, he wasn't. But he was aware of its existence, and he knew enough about it to write authoritatively on it, but he didn't practice. Then, of course, you've got the Industrial Revolution. By this time, Uranus has been discovered, Neptune is being discovered, and you've got the emergence of the middle classes with not a lot to do. So this is where the start of esotericism. By the time of Neptune's discovery, you're seeing the rise of mesmerism, hypnotism, esotericism, spirituality, the first cameras, the first commercial brewing of alcohol, the first drug wars, and then we get to where Pluto is, and this is episode 8. Episode 7 covers the development of astrology in mid-period Europe with Kepler and Brahe, and the American Revolution. The penultimate episode covers the return of astrology to Northwest Europe and Britain, particularly in the 1800s, the discovery of the outer planets, from the discovery of Uranus to Pluto. And the final episode covers the time from 1930, with the discovery of Pluto, to 2030, with the internet revolution and how astrology is
just exploding,
becoming the new lingua franca of the emerging consciousness revolution.
I just want to wind it back a wee bit to the Age of Enlightenment, because that was sort of the age of reason, age of light, 1700s, when Newton was knocking about. Because for me, that seems to have changed hugely, that sort of scientific approach to life, the explosion of his scientific experiments and understanding. If you can't see it, you can't prove it, so it doesn't exist. And my understanding, that's when astrology was elbow sideways. Is that true?
It is. When I was at your place a few months ago and we were interviewing Gary Phillipson, we were talking about the intelligent universe and whether matter has consciousness, whether rocks or grass has consciousness, whether galaxies or the universe has consciousness. And he quoted Richard Dawkins as saying that, when you look at a constellation in the sky, a pattern of stars in the sky, you might as well just be looking at a pattern of mold on your ceiling. It's inert, it's dead. Whereas panpsychism talks of the intelligent universe, everything having valence, life force, and consciousness. which to me, with the scientific breakthroughs of the Newtonian era, this speaks to me of, okay, at first, the rationality, the age of reason, the age of rationality. Of course, we can't believe in astrology, but a few of them are going, yeah, but it works. So how does it work? And in the background, there was still research and work going on, going, how can the planets affect us? Well, we know the moon does. And then as technology developed, it became, for example, you can hear Jupiter on a shortwave.
I love that. I love when you said that to me. I loved it. We just thought, oh my God, Jupiter can be in your kitchen on your shortwave radio. I love that.
It's great. And a not kind of I love putting that one on the rational scientists. Yeah. So there you got basically how astrology has pervaded the giving of meaning to patterns and cycles in the night sky and deriving some form of interaction with events on Earth has been in humanity's consciousness
forever.
Conservatively, I would say for at least 50,000 years. But in terms of recognizable, attributable evidence, scientifically and historically, I can only show this in the last 7,000 years, 6,000 to 7,000 years.
But Steve, I was away on retreat at this New Year down in Devon, where there was no light pollution. And it was incredible to look up. You could see Mars, you could see Jupiter, and obviously Venus was knocking about as well. And I mean, the awe of being able to look up into the stars. And we've always been looking up at the stars.
Always.
I mean, the planet's one thing and the beauty of that. But when the night comes, we have a different show. And it takes you beyond yourself. It's incredible. No wonder we've always been, well, what the hell is all this about?
For someone to look at the night sky and go, oh, that's just points of light, doesn't mean anything, is an abuse of human consciousness. It's denying your own
experience, what it means to be a physical life.
Yeah, it just doesn't work for me.
No, nor me.
When in the daytime I look at landscape and horizon, and at night I look at the horizon and the stars. It is all about bringing heaven down to earth. And this is what secret societies have done over the millennia. They've tried to replicate heaven on earth in their architecture, in the way they plan their cities, in their artworks.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's great. People who are, I mean, also, I've just made a note here about the mathematics of it, that mathematics is the language of the universe, because through mathematics, you can create form. You can bring heaven to earth.
Yes. Yes. Yes, because we see the replication on Earth of whether it's Washington, D.C. set out to Virgo, whether it's the pyramids at Giza set out to the way the Orion's belt was at the time that they were built. I find it fascinating on my discoveries that Avebury Stone Circle was built at least 500 years before the Great Pyramid. The ideas of Anne Macaulay, who wouldn't release her book on these patterns until after she was dead, she suggested that actually we got history wrong, and that history moved from the western fringes of Europe towards the east rather than the other way round, because the megalithic structures of northern Morocco, Portugal, northwest Spain, Brittany, Ireland, Britain, Norway, the Atlantic fringe structures are older than any other structure in Europe or Asia, although the new developments in Turkey.
Well, that's different, isn't it? Quebec.
But this is pointing to, and all of these megalithic structures were built to the patterns of the stars in the sky as they were at the time that the structures were built, which is how we can date them.
Yeah.
So this speaks to me of a much vaster, not necessarily civilization, but a much vaster consciousness of our relationship with the sky and the heavens than is currently supposed to be accepted.
Mm. So, Steve, it's a series of 9 programs or sessions.
Yes, but this is 10. There's an episode 0, which is a kind of 15-minute summary of the whole thing.
And that's going to be shortly, isn't it?
That'll be released at the end of January, free of charge. Yeah.
And where can people see this? Because this is the sort of telling of what the films are about, the series is about.
It's looking like there's going to be 9 episodes, somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes long each. And we're in negotiations with a large international hosting platform that's not one of the big corporates. I'll be announcing the actual place where it's going to be launched from on my YouTube channel at Steve Judd Astrology on YouTube. But we'll be announcing that within 2 or 3 weeks. And then we're going to be releasing 1 episode a month. That's the plan at the moment. So episode 1 will be out at the end of February, 2 at the end of March. And then that will then lead us through to, I think it's the end of October for episode 9.
Yeah.
So yes, people will be, it won't be for micro payments, but it certainly won't be macro. We'll be charging somewhere between £5 to £10 per view because it'll be streaming, not download.
Yeah.
And that's about $7 to $15 per view, which is affordable, we think. And because I've invested my entire life savings in this.
Absolutely. Well, I just pay homage for you answering the call to make this. The universe wanted you to do this, Steve.
I've been doing astrology since 1977. I've always been doing readings and writing books and giving talks. Yeah, great. But then the idea, I've always wanted to do this. For 20 years, I've wanted to do a film on it. And it's never been acceptable. But now the time is right.
Definitely.
The time is right now, and it's happening. There's a momentum behind it. And it feels like this is a legacy for me. This is my life's work. It makes me wonder what I'm going to do when this is finished. But it's an amazing thing. I'm learning so much. I'm meeting so many influential people. And I'm learning so much about the nature of the patterns, the geometry, and the cycles that actually empower life on Earth. There's something about this which is way beyond common perception and common comprehension of what it is that powers our planet and the universe.
And us. And us, I just think we're conduits. I don't know if you do.
Yes.
Kind of like this conduit energy, but we've forgotten it. We've forgotten that.
Well, at the end of the day, Sue, you and I as astrologers, we both know that astrology works.
We do. So
and for anyone who chooses to go, no, it doesn't, you don't believe in that old rubbish, we go, well, look, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of clients who come back every year.
Yes.
And these are very intelligent people.
They are. Well, they have to be, because they wouldn't come otherwise. Well, I'm not saying that unintelligent people don't believe in astrology, but certainly in my experience, these are people that really want to know who they are and want to contribute that.
Yeah. Post-COVID as well, there's been such a surge in astrological growth.
Yeah, the call is out there. It's in the zeitgeist. Steve, I just want to ask you one more question before we finish. What is maybe it's really difficult to answer this, but what is the golden nugget that you've learned during making these films?
That there's more to this life than meets the eye. that there is more to life than just living, paying taxes, working, having children, and death. There is a continuity of consciousness that pervades all of existence. And it is not just linked with individual souls and human development. It is linked with the cosmos and the universe. There is a holistic universe out there. And it's waiting for us. It's calling us home.
Calling us home. Too right. All right, lovely. Well, thank you so much for this. And I hope everyone is really inspired who's watching this to go and to watch the 15-minute introduction. And then, as you say, you will be putting information on how people watch the streaming as it comes out. And I will be seeing you soon for our normal Ask Steve Judd session.
Yes, we will. Back to normal. As far as 2025 is going to be normal.
As much as normal can be in 2025, because, well, that's for another discussion. All right, Steve, thank you so much. Bye for now.